Julian was a very memorable character. I got to tell you a little bit about his creation, some of it, and some of his adventures. That one of the best players I ever had in my games. He ran Julian in a fascinating way. Julian was not created in the normal way. Um, Early on, I wrote a program I called Birth, which was a character generator. It was designed to generate player characters. And I used first edition rules, and it was an interesting program to write, and it handled many of the features that you normally associate with first edition. It handled all the roles and such. And a friend of mine asked for a copy, and I gave him a copy of Birth. He then proceeded to generate 10,000 characters and sorted through them till he found the one he wanted. Now, Birth rolled 3d6 and straight down the stats. No rearrangement, straight. And then it tried to figure out what best class and what races it could possibly be, and did a whole bunch of interesting stuff that I tried at the time. And anyway, he found Julian. Now, Julian was a fighter. Had 1800 strength. Now, if you're familiar with going back to OD&D, where you rolled percentage rolls for the strength, if you had 18, and so you had 18 double out strength. The strange thing about Julian was Julian actually was created as a woman, because a woman, not a man. And he had, or she had, a whole bunch of other attributes, and he wanted to change that. And I said, well, anyway, that we went on. So Julian was a facet, just by the normal creation, scanned through thousands of characters to find one that met what his expectations were. And Julian had 18 constitution, 18 strength. I can't remember many of the other stats because they weren't that important, because this was a fighter. This was a fighter that went out there. And so the the player who created Julian, we went on a bunch of adventures, and finally Julian made a bunch of money. So he had a bunch of gold, and it's one of the interesting challenges. What do player characters do when they've got a bunch of gold? They create things. Well, okay. So one day the player was out looking, and he saw these handheld fertilizer things that you crank. You put the fertilizer in the top, and you get the little crank on the side, and it sprays out the fertilizer on the lawn. He actually may have been using it to fertilize his father's lawn. I'm not sure, but he came up with the idea. He saw that, and one of the interesting creatures way back when is what's called a rot grub. And a rot grub is a little teeny maggot. Let's be honest, it's a giant maggot that it lands on you, burrows in, and can kill you very quickly. It's a nasty little insidious creature. So Julian takes his money and says, I want to build a rot grub proof suit. I don't care how much it costs. I want a rot grub proof suit. So that there's that, and most importantly, I need gloves that can handle rot grubs. Okay. So we created this. Now I want ceramic containers that can contain rot grubs. Okay, not a problem. So far, so good. Goes out on an adventure to find rot grubs. Then fills the containers with a bunch of rot grubs and throws in things that they ingest. And so he's got a rot grub farm. That's phase one. Phase two, Now I want to build a rot grub spreader. The idea is that you'd put it on your shoulders. You have a big drum behind your head filled with rot grubs and a huge crank. And as you crank, it sprays rot grubs everywhere. So this was an inventive character. I mean, this is about as devastating a weapon as you can possibly imagine, because you put this thing on, which is, you have to have all the, you have to roll and just to see if there's any chance that you get rot grubs, and you have to be very careful and all this stuff. And then you load it up, and it's like loading up a flamethrower, but it's rot grubs. Then you go out and you wade into the enemy. You crank the crank as you go through, and spreads rot grubs all over places, so any enemy that comes up towards you gets covered with rot grubs. Yes, it kills lots of the rot grubs, but that doesn't really matter because there are lots and lots of rot grubs, and they just dig through and kill anything that's living that you're going against. And actually, the interesting argument is rot grubs spread this way actually can affect certain undead because they will eat them. But anyway, so he invented this horrendous weapon that was there. But being the devious DM that I was, I had the party captured. Now, you have to put yourself, this is many years ago, this is over 20 years ago, where tattooing was nowhere near as common as it is today. Let's be honest. 20 years ago, you didn't run into many people. I remember my dad mentioning one of the guys he worked with who was in construction, who had an interesting tattoo, which was around his neck. He had a dotted line and then the word "cut" on the dotted line tattooed. Okay, but that's an unusual tattoo that sort of is memorable. But most people, you had a few people with tattoos and didn't think. But I remember reading the description of, was it the one character in Moby Dick who is covered in head to toe by tattoos, and the party goes out on a sea adventure, and they kill some sea monsters and so on, and they get captured by cannibals. And it's the phrase called "angry villager rule," where there are just so many of them that they can overrun you. And because they were captured on the ship, that Julian didn't have his rot grub spreader with him at the time, but they captured him. And one of the things that I did to Julian was tattoo him from head to toe, which was interesting. So Julian went on a couple of interesting quests to make his character more the way he wanted his character to be. And I remember he first off went hunting for a girdle of masculinity, femininity. So he became the first transgender character I've ever had. Yeah, it was the first. He came in and he got the girdle because he wanted to be, though his character was originally a female, he wanted Julian to be male. Everything about Julian was male. He was a male trapped into a woman's body, and so he found the girdle of masculinity and femininity. And when he got captured by the cannibals, I think they wanted to take that away. That was part of the adventure. That I think he got that back. But he ended up being tattooed from head to toe. Now, he also then went in a sort of searching for a ring of polymorph self. And what he wanted to do was he just polymorphed himself into himself without the tattoos. So Julian was, he was a walking, talking, interesting. He didn't like what I'd done to him by being tattooed, so he had found a way around it. And this went on and on, and Julian was getting up there. I can't remember exactly how high a level he was. And then they found I think it was a ring, might have been a sword, but I think it was a ring of wishes. And I don't know if you've read some of this, but it's like what is a safe wish to make? And they were fairly deep down a dungeon, and this is one where I got into a sort of a disagreement over with the character, and I think it was Larry Niven who actually said the only safe wish. He wrote a short story. I can't remember the name of it, but about the safe wish. If you're going to make a wish, what is one wish that is really hard for anyone to pervert? And it's 3 words. I wish to be healthy. And if you look it up and find the story by Larry Niven. So Julian wished to be healthy. And his argument was that the tattoos were not healthy because they affect the skin and so on. He was hoping to get rid of those and to cure any disease and wounds. But Julian was a female character. And this is where we got into a subtle disagreement with the player and the player and I. I said, "Oh, yes." And a few months later, Julian suddenly realizes, yes, he was female, and he is now with child. And it's an interesting question, and I perhaps was being a bit mischievous, but the question was, is being pregnant healthy? That's a philosophical discussion that we had along with that, because that was, who you can get into lots of different arguments, whether pro or con or whatever. But anyway, I can't remember what happened after that, but I finally relented and says, okay, so Julian is no longer pregnant, but he is still a female, which was an interesting thing. But that was one of the characters that I really remember because it was hilarious. He would wade into many enemies. Julian, I think, finally died when he took on something that was. He went off by himself. He separated from the party and ran into some heavy-duty monsters, and he didn't back down, and he didn't have any healing potions or anything like that. So he just kept going. But Julian was, he was a tank. He was weighted in, and finally his hit points just kept dropping. And if he had retreated, and he wouldn't, but we were both sort of, it was a way to go out with style, because we knew that we'd all left college, and we were still gaming together, but we were sort of separating ways. We knew that some of us were going off in different directions. And it was a way for Julian to go out in style, because he went out, as the saying goes, he died with his boots on. He didn't kill the last, I think it was a 12 hit die monster, which in OD&D and AD&D was really quite nasty. And he managed to really seriously hurt the monster, but it was like the 10th or 11th encounter he had went on without any healing, and he had devastated this, but he went out in style. But Julian was one of those and it was the player character showed real inventiveness. They would find things, figure out perverse ways to use them to get by. Like I said, I still remember the rot grub spreader, because that was a swath of devastation going through anything, because it would throw out. I know that they were thinking of trying to do something with green slime, but green slime is so insidious, and because it affects so many things. And the other one was yellow mold. I know that they were looking at, but it was the rot grub spreader was the one that was hilarious. But Julian was a hoot when somebody with imagination can come up with interesting ways to make the adventure keep going, because it was all on the player. And unfortunately, I lost track of him, but he was that was a lot of fun. Julian was a fascinating character. If you like my video, press the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate that. Or if this interests you, you can always subscribe to my channel. There's a button right above. I look forward to hearing some comments. Tell me what you think about this, and I'll try and reply, and we can see if I'll do some more of these. Thank you.